I used to think my life was exactly what it looked like from the outside. Comfortable, loving, safe. Our house always smelled like fresh coffee and lavender. Family photos filled every wall, and Victor's laugh used to make the whole place feel alive. He was my best friend, my calm, my forever. He held me when I broke down, brought me tulips in winter, and whispered promises that felt real. But lately, something in the air had shifted. The warmth started slipping away, quietly, like steam off a cooling cup. At first, I tried to explain it to myself. Work stress, maybe. He'd been talking about that new campaign at the office nonstop. But then came the late nights, the weekend errands that popped up out of nowhere, the way his screen would go black the second I walked in. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Every couple goes through phases, right? Still, I felt the distance growing between us, and I couldn't ignore it. Something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew it. I didn't mean to snoop. I swear I didn't. He'd left his tablet on the kitchen counter, and I was just going to check a recipe I'd saved. That's when it happened. One swipe, one stupid swipe. And there it was, open messages. At first I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing, but as I kept reading, my hands started to shake. Flirty texts, pictures, and then her name, Juliana, my cousin, my blood. I couldn't breathe. My ears were ringing, and my heart felt like it had dropped straight through the floor. I kept scrolling, hoping, praying, that somehow I was wrong. Maybe it was some sick joke, some weird misunderstanding. But no. There she was, sending him photos I wish I could erase from my mind. And there he was, calling her things he used to say to me. My hands were ice cold. I just stood there, staring, the kitchen spinning around me like I was in someone else's nightmare. It wasn't just the betrayal of a husband. It was the betrayal of someone who'd shared my childhood, who used to braid my hair and cry with me at Grandma's funeral. Juliana and I were close, like sisters. I'd let her into my home, into my heart. And now she was in my bed, in my life, stealing the one person I thought I could count on. The worst part? Neither of them knew I'd found out. They were still out there, lying, laughing behind my back like nothing had changed, like I was the fool. And I was, at least for a moment. I wanted to scream, to throw that tablet through the window, to drive to her house and tear down every wall. But I didn't. I didn't cry, not even a little, because something inside me clicked. Cold, steady. I wasn't going to break down. No, I was going to break them. Not with shouting or drama, but with precision, with silence, with a plan. I started watching them, closely, quietly. Every excuse he made, every shift in his tone, every flicker in his eyes when her name came up. I took mental notes like a surgeon studying before an operation. No one suspected a thing. I still smiled, cooked dinner, kissed him goodnight. He thought he was safe. She thought she'd won. Neither of them saw what was coming. And honestly, that made it all the more satisfying. I wasn't planning revenge. I was building it. But let me tell you something. It hurt. Every second. Sometimes I'd stand in the shower just to hide the sound of my own breathing, because I couldn't afford to break. I'd run my fingers along the sink, remembering all the mornings we shared there, brushing our teeth, making stupid faces in the mirror. The memories felt like paper cuts, small, constant stings I couldn't stop reliving. But I refused to let those wounds turn into scars that belonged to them. They didn't get to define my story. So I made a choice, not to collapse, not to confront, but to control. I wouldn't scream. I would smile. I wouldn't beg. I would lead. And soon I found the perfect way to begin. A little lie, harmless at first glance, a spark that would light the fire beneath their feet. And it all started with two simple words. I'm pregnant. I'd never lied like that before. Not about something so big, so loaded with consequence. But that morning, I looked him straight in the eyes, let my lower lip tremble just a little, and whispered, "Victor, I'm pregnant." His face froze, like someone had pressed pause on the man I used to know. And for a second, I swear, I saw guilt flash across his features before he masked it with forced joy. He wrapped me in his arms, too tight, too fast. I could feel his heartbeat. It wasn't excitement. It was panic. He said all the right things. "Wow, really? That's amazing. We're gonna be okay, baby." But his hands were cold. His voice cracked on the word, "we." I knew exactly what was going through his mind. How do I keep this from Juliana? And that's exactly where I wanted him. Cornered, tangled, afraid to make a wrong move. I acted like I believed him, like I was floating on a cloud of baby bliss. And the best part? He didn't suspect a thing. By dinner, the news had traveled. I accidentally left the ultrasound printout, totally fake, on the fridge, right next to our grocery list. My sister screamed when she saw it. My mom cried. Victor stood there, smiling like a man walking through fire in a silk suit. But the real fun began when Juliana found out. She texted me a single word. "Seriously?" I didn't reply. I didn't have to. That silence said everything. And oh, how she hated that. She started slipping almost immediately. You could feel the tension in every word she spoke around me. Tight, brittle, like a woman holding her breath. At a family brunch, she barely looked at me. When she finally did, her smile was a cracked plate, all edges and no warmth. Victor tried to act normal, but I could see it. The way his leg bounced under the table. The way he avoided eye contact. I watched them like a hawk. Every glance, every twitch, every lie layered over another. At home, Victor was different. He hovered, asked too many questions, offered to cook, to clean, to run to the store for snacks I hadn't even craved. I played the glowing mom-to-be, rubbing my belly, humming lullabies, flipping through baby name books just loud enough for him to hear. And when I caught him staring, I'd give him this soft, dreamy smile. It was all theater. But I was the star, the director, and the script was mine. He had no idea he was already in the second act of a play he never auditioned for. Meanwhile, Juliana was spiraling. She called him constantly, and when he thought I was asleep, he'd answer in whispers. Angry whispers. I made a habit of getting up for a glass of water just in time to accidentally overhear them. "What do you want me to do, Juliana?" he hissed one night. "She's pregnant. What do you expect me to do?" I slipped back into bed and smiled in the dark. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about control, about showing them both exactly who they underestimated. I started staging little moments, just enough to make everything feel more real. I set alarms for fake doctor visits and came back waving ultrasound updates I'd designed myself. I even bought prenatal vitamins and left the bottle half open on the bathroom counter. Victor would ask how the baby was doing, and I'd touch my belly gently, eyes shining. "Growing fast," I'd say, and I'd watch as his soul quietly unraveled. He was trapped in a lie he couldn't control, and I made sure the walls kept closing in. I knew exactly how to play it. Sweet. Innocent. Overflowing with maternal joy. I baked cookies for the neighbors, wore flowing dresses, even started a Pinterest board called Baby Love. The irony tasted sweeter than sugar. Juliana, on the other hand, was losing her grip. She stopped showing up to family events, but when she did, she looked like a shadow of herself. Restless, snappy, brittle. And I just kept smiling. Being the woman everyone adored. The mother-to-be with a heart of gold. But the best part? No one knew I was watching. Listening. Gathering every scrap of their mess while they drowned in it. I wasn't done yet, not even close. The storm hadn't hit. Not really. I was just turning up the pressure, slowly, like tightening a lid on a boiling pot. And soon, I'd make sure it exploded, exactly when and where I wanted. Things got tight, tense, the kind of tense you can feel in your teeth. Every morning, Victor would kiss me goodbye with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and every evening, he came home more worn, more twisted up inside. I kept the act going, of course. "The baby and I missed you," I'd whisper, curling into his side like everything was perfect. And he'd nod, say something soft, but I could hear it, the crack in his voice. He was breaking, and I was right there to watch it happen. I started creating little moments of proof. One day I left a folded ultrasound photo in his briefcase with a note, "Can't wait to meet our little miracle." Another day I texted him a video of a fake heartbeat playing through my phone, tears in my eyes, thanking him for being my rock. He didn't respond right away. When he did, it was just a thumbs-up emoji. That's when I knew he was drowning. Juliana was pulling from one side, I was dragging from the other, and he couldn't keep both lies above water. They fought constantly now. I knew because I made sure they did. I'd accidentally leave bits of confusing info where Juliana might find them, an appointment time that didn't match up, a receipt for prenatal tea Victor never bought me. He started getting sloppy, snappy, caught between guilt and survival. And I played dumb. I cried when I needed to, laughed when it mattered. I was the picture of grace under pressure, and all the while, I kept turning the screws, just a little tighter each day. Juliana started texting me again. At first, little jabs disguised as concern. "How are you feeling? Must be exhausting." Then came the snide remarks. "Hope Victor's stepping up as a father." I never replied. Silence was my weapon, and she was bleeding from every unspoken word. I knew she was cracking. Her ego couldn't take being ignored. And Victor, poor Victor, was caught in a minefield of his own making. Every lie he told now had to align with mine. One misstep, and everything would blow. At a Sunday family dinner, I orchestrated my masterpiece. I stood at the head of the table, a glowing smile on my face, hand gently resting on my belly. "This little one," I said, voice trembling just enough, "reminds me every day that life is about second chances, forgiveness, loyalty, and the gift of new beginnings." My mother wiped a tear. My sister toasted to my strength. And across the table, Victor and Juliana looked like ghosts trapped in daylight. Their faces drained, lips tight, eyes darting, caught. I looked at them and almost laughed. They had no idea how much I knew, how much I'd planned. Every moment they shared, I was there. Every stolen text, every lie whispered between sheets. I was the shadow they didn't see. And now, they were the ones pretending. Faking smiles, faking peace. Meanwhile, I was building a truth so sharp it could slice them both open when the time was right. And oh, that time was getting close. I could feel it, the collapse coming. Victor barely spoke to me unless prompted. When he did, his voice was cautious, like stepping through broken glass. Juliana stopped showing up altogether, and when she did call, it was always with urgency. Panic. She was unraveling faster than he was. And I just kept smiling. I'd rub my stomach at the perfect moments, let people fawn over me, ask me baby names, give me gifts. I became untouchable, sacred. No one lies to a glowing mother, not without consequence. I started dreaming about it, the moment I'd finally let it all spill. What it would look like, what I'd wear, how their faces would fall. I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted revenge that whispered, that slid in under their skin and stayed there. Something unforgettable, something public, something they'd never live down. But it had to be perfect. The timing, the crowd, the reveal. I could feel it boiling under the surface, and I wasn't about to lift the lid until it was ready to erupt. So I waited. watched, listened. Let them believe, even just for a little longer, that they still had control, that they might still get away with it. But deep inside, I was already planning the moment the curtain would rise. And when it did, oh, they would both wish they'd never met me. Because the truth wasn't just coming. I was going to deliver it myself, with a bow on top. I picked the day carefully. A family reunion. How poetic. My mother insisted on throwing a baby shower at the same time, and I didn't stop her. In fact, I helped plan it. Baked cookies, wrapped favors, smiled for every photo. It was the perfect storm. Relatives from out of town, lifelong friends, and enough decorations to make it all feel festive. I wore a soft blue dress, the one Victor used to say made me glow. And I did glow, just not for the reason anyone thought. Victor looked like hell. Dark circles, nervous laugh, overcompensating with jokes and forced affection. Juliana? She almost didn't come, but she did. She walked in late, hair too perfect, smile too tight, and when she saw me standing next to Victor, hand on my belly, her eyes twitched with something between rage and fear. I welcomed her like a sister, hugged her, whispered, "So glad you made it." The truth was, I wouldn't have done it without her there. This moment was meant for both of them. People were everywhere, drinking punch, laughing, celebrating a baby that didn't exist. I let it build. Let the joy bubble up until the air practically crackled with it. I walked from table to table, soaking it all in, the compliments, the blessings, the innocent belief. Then I tapped my glass gently, 3 times. The room quieted, all eyes on me. I smiled, holding the printed sonogram in one hand and a stack of paper in the other. And in that silence, I felt calm. More calm than I'd felt in months. I took a breath and started with the story everyone expected. How grateful I was, how much the support meant, how excited Victor and I were to welcome this miracle. I saw heads nodding, a few people dabbing their eyes. Juliana had her arms crossed, barely blinking. Victor stood beside me, frozen. He didn't know what was coming, but something in his gut must have started to twist. Then, I paused, held the sonogram up high. "I have a confession," I said. "There is no baby." Gasps. A glass clinked to the floor. Someone whispered, "What?" I let the silence stretch like a rubber band pulled tight. "But there is something else," I continued, voice steady, eyes locked on Juliana. "There is betrayal, from a man I shared my life with, and from a woman I once called my sister." I turned to Victor. "You can look away if you want, but this part is yours." And then I held up the printouts, screenshots of messages, timestamps, pictures. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I watched the color drain from his face, watched Juliana's mask crack in real time. Her lips parted like she wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. Not with the proof hanging in the air like smoke from a fire she started herself. The room was dead silent. My aunt covered her mouth. My cousin stood up, furious. And I just stood there, calm as a candle in a hurricane. Because this wasn't chaos. This was clarity. This was the moment I had crafted with care, and it was hitting exactly where I wanted it to. Victor tried to speak. He stammered, reached out like that would somehow undo everything I'd just laid bare. "Karen, please, But I shook my head gently. I wasn't here to argue. I wasn't here to listen. Juliana's eyes were glassy, her hands trembling as she tried to explain it away. "It wasn't like that. It just happened. You don't understand." But I understood more than they ever thought I could, and I made sure they saw it, that I wasn't broken. I was done. People began to shift in their seats, whispering. Some stared at Victor with disgust. Others looked away in disbelief. A few people actually got up and left. The air in that room had changed. No more streamers and cake and fake joy. Just the raw, ugly truth standing under the baby banner like a final, bitter joke. I took off the little corsage someone had pinned on me earlier and laid it on the table. My last gesture, my quiet mic drop. And with that, I stepped away from center stage. But not before looking over my shoulder, just once. Because that moment, that wasn't the end. Not for me. It was just the start of something else. Something cleaner, sharper, stronger. I walked out of that house with nothing but my purse and my peace. And behind me, they were left to deal with the wreckage they created. Together. No longer a secret, no longer protected. Just two people exposed in the light they tried so hard to avoid. But I wasn't done rising. Not yet. The fallout was immediate. Victor moved out 2 days later. Well, more like vanished. Left behind a pile of unopened mail, some of his clothes, and the scent of cologne I used to love. The whispers spread like wildfire. At the grocery store, people looked twice. At church, they avoided eye contact or stared a little too long. Juliana went into hiding, supposedly traveling to clear her head. But everyone knew. Our family had a way of holding on to betrayal like an heirloom, and this one was going to be passed around for years. Their fairy tale fell apart fast. Without the thrill of sneaking around, they were just two broken people who ruined a good woman for nothing. I heard through the grapevine that they were fighting constantly, that Juliana accused him of ruining her life. That Victor started drinking more, sleeping less. They tried to paint me as the villain, of course, said I was manipulative, cruel. But here's the thing. Nobody believed them, because when the truth comes out in broad daylight, lies don't stand a chance. And me? I didn't fall apart. I filed for divorce with my head held high. No drama, no tears, just quiet certainty. I went back to school. I joined a women's group. I started writing again. At first, it was just journaling, late at night with a cup of tea and the house finally silent. But soon, it became something bigger. People wanted to hear my story. Women reached out. Some cried. Some laughed. All of them saw themselves in me. And that connection, it rebuilt me. Piece by piece. I started living again, not just existing in the shell of a woman who'd been betrayed. I changed my hair, redecorated the house, gave away every single thing that reminded me of them. I even got rid of the couch where I once cried myself to sleep, replacing it with one so bright and bold it made me feel alive just looking at it. My mornings became mine again. Coffee in hand, sunlight on my face. No tension hanging in the air like a ghost. And the silence? It became peace, not punishment. People started treating me differently. Not with pity, but with respect. The kind that sticks. Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out. Strangers at events whispered, "You're that woman from the story, right?" I never flinched. I never looked away. Because yes, I was her. The woman who turned devastation into power. I wasn't just surviving. I was building something unshakable. I started consulting, speaking, helping others reclaim their stories, because mine wasn't unique, but it was proof that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means transforming. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if Victor ever truly understood what he lost. Not just me, but the version of himself he destroyed. Same with Juliana. Maybe she thought she'd won something, but in the end, all she did was strip herself bare in front of everyone who used to love her. I don't hate them. Not anymore. They gave me the fire I needed to burn down the old version of my life. And in its place, I built something stronger. I walk differently now. Shoulders back, steps steady. Not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because I don't have to. The weight that once clung to me like a second skin is gone. People still talk, sure. They whisper. They speculate. They wonder what I'll do next. And honestly, let them. Because I know who I am now. Not someone's wife. Not someone's second choice. I am the woman who looked heartbreak in the face and didn't blink. I'm writing my story, not just metaphorically. A memoir, maybe. A cautionary tale. Or maybe just a love letter to the version of me that refused to disappear. It's funny. They thought they broke me. They thought I'd fade into bitterness, into silence. But instead, I found my voice, and I used it. Not to scream, but to speak clearly. Loud enough for every other woman walking through betrayal to hear, "You are not done. You are becoming." And that's the truth they'll never escape. Victor and Juliana can have their shame, their silence, their shattered illusion. I have something better: freedom, self-respect, a future that's finally truly mine. And as I step forward, heels clicking against the pavement, wind catching the edge of my coat, I don't look back. Because what's behind me burned, and what's ahead, it's wide open, bright, and it belongs to me.
Ticket at me like it was trash and said, "Here, loser, good luck next time, LOL. That same ticket won me $581 million. When I told them the news, their faces went pale. Then they fell to their knees, begging, literally begging. But by then, I was no longer their daughter. Just a walking jackpot they'd tried to throw away. My name's Rachel. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where the sidewalks cracked, but my heart cracked more. You'd think every kid gets love from their parents. But for me, love always had conditions. My sister, Amanda, was the golden child. Blonde curls, big blue eyes, dimples you could fall into. She could do no wrong. She failed her classes? My mom would say she's just creative. She wrecked her car while texting? Dad said she's young, let her live. She quit her job 3 weeks in? It wasn't aligned with her energy. Me, I got straight A's, worked 2 part-time jobs through high school. I once brought home a math trophy and was told, "Trophies don't pay bills." I remember birthdays. Amanda got pony rides and bounce houses. I got a used cardigan and a cupcake. At Christmas, Amanda unwrapped designer shoes while I sat with socks in my lap. But I smiled, always smiled. Not because I was okay, but because being bitter made my throat hurt more than pretending. I moved out right after high school, got into a local college with some scholarship money, and worked night shifts cleaning offices. It was hard. My hands were always cracked from cleaning chemicals, and sometimes I skipped meals so I could pay rent. But I kept pushing, thinking, one day maybe they'll see me. Once a month, I visited my parents. Not because they ever asked, but because I hoped maybe this time they'd be proud. Then, a few months ago, something happened. Something that shattered the last bit of hope I had. It was Amanda's birthday. I wasn't invited, of course, but I went to drop off a small gift anyway. I'd saved up for a little leather journal. I thought maybe it'd help her focus, or at least feel special. That's when I saw it. A ribbon-cutting ceremony in the backyard. My dad grinning like he won the lottery himself. My mom crying tears of joy. They were giving Amanda a house. A full, renovated guest house. Painted white with lilac shutters, fully furnished, a fridge stocked with wine. "She deserves it," Mom said, to the group of neighbors clapping around them. "She's our baby." I stood at the edge of the crowd, invisible, holding a $15 journal wrapped in brown paper. Later that night, I confronted them. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe an apology. Maybe we were going to surprise you two. But instead, my dad reached into his back pocket, pulled out a folded $5 lottery ticket, and flicked it toward me like a bug. "There. Maybe you'll get lucky," he snorted. "Good luck next time, loser." Amanda laughed so hard she almost choked on champagne. I didn't cry. I walked away with the ticket, clutched in my fist, nails digging into my palm. My hands were shaking. My chest felt like it might cave in. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my apartment floor, staring at that stupid ticket. Something inside me whispered, "This is just more trash from people who think you're trash." But I didn't throw it away. I shoved it in the drawer next to my bills and forgot about it until everything changed. A week later, I was cleaning out the kitchen drawer. Bills, receipts, old batteries, and that crumpled ticket. For a moment, I just stared at it. Part of me wanted to rip it up, burn it even, but a tiny whisper inside said, just check. I walked down to the gas station on 6th and Vine. It was drizzling, and I didn't even have an umbrella. My shoes squeaked with every step. The guy behind the counter, Pete, was sipping lukewarm coffee and watching a tiny TV that flickered every few seconds. Hey, Pete, I mumbled. Can you scan this? He gave me that familiar look. The kind you give someone who you know probably won't win. Still, he took the ticket, scanned it, and suddenly he froze. His eyes widened. The scanner beeped, then beeped again, louder. He looked at me, mouth slightly open. Rachel, do you know what this says? I blinked. No. Pete took a deep breath. You just won the Powerball. $581 million. I laughed. I actually laughed. I thought he was messing with me. Okay, yeah. Funny. I get it. Good one, Pete. But his hand shook as he turned the screen toward me. There it was. The numbers. My numbers. My heart stopped for a second. I touched my chest to make sure it was still beating. I started to feel lightheaded. The gas station felt too bright, too loud, too much. I stumbled outside and sat on the curb in the rain. $581 million, I whispered to myself again and again. That's when the tears came, but not the happy kind. They were heavy, angry. Years of being overlooked, ignored, treated like a second thought. This wasn't just money. It was validation. It was power. I didn't tell anyone right away, not even my best friend. I got legal advice, hired a financial planner, moved the winnings into a trust, with my name nowhere public. I changed my number, rented a temporary apartment in the next town, and I stayed silent, but I watched. For weeks, I lived in a quiet storm. Every inch of me was conflicted. Part of me wanted to just keep going, forget the whole thing, take the money and disappear. But then I would hear my mom's voice in my head. You're not like your sister. I could almost hear Amanda's laugh echoing through my mind. Her laughter always felt like daggers, sharp and cold. But it wasn't her I hated. It was what she represented. Everything I wasn't. I was the hardworking one, the quiet one, the invisible one. My mom and dad always compared me to her, and in their eyes, she was the perfect daughter, deserving of everything. And there I was, alone, staring at my phone in a crappy apartment I could barely afford, realizing I wasn't even invited to her engagement party. The text I received from my parents a few days before read, We're doing something special for Amanda. She needs the love. She needs the love. I couldn't even remember the last time my parents told me they loved me. It wasn't that I wanted to be spoiled like Amanda. I just wanted recognition. A simple, hey, we see you would have sufficed. It was late one night when I finally let the weight of everything hit me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heartbeat echo in my ears. I could hear Amanda's voice, then my mom's, then my dad's, all those years of dismissing me, devaluing me. It felt like I was drowning in all the years I'd spent trying to be seen. I reached for my phone, and I almost called them. I almost sent them a message that said, I won, and I'm not who you think I am. But I didn't. Instead, I threw my phone on the bed and closed my eyes, letting the anger surge through me. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the house or the lottery ticket. It was all of it. The years of being overlooked. My hands were shaking as I held the crumpled ticket that had started it all. The sound of my parents' laughter echoed in my mind. Good luck next time, LOL. It felt like a slap across my face. The pain of being treated like a joke finally started to seep in. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palms, feeling a mixture of sadness and rage that threatened to suffocate me. I knew something had to change, but what could I do? I was a quiet, overlooked daughter who had been built up to think I didn't deserve the same things as Amanda. It was like a constant narrative. Amanda was the chosen one, the beautiful one, the successful one. Then, in the darkness of my bedroom, I realized something. This wasn't just about the lottery money. It wasn't about showing them that I could succeed. It was about taking my power back. I wasn't going to be their punching bag anymore. I wasn't going to let them dictate my worth based on what they thought was best. I didn't need to prove anything to them, but that didn't mean I wouldn't. I started to plan. I called a lawyer the next day to set up an appointment for a consultation. I set up meetings with business advisors and financial experts. I hired a PR firm, and I started preparing everything in silence. It wasn't going to be some grand gesture where I revealed the truth all at once. No, I do it my way. I do it with class. And I do it on my terms. The hardest part of all of this was the emotional toll it took on me. I spent hours going over my old journals, entries where I had poured my heart out, wondering if anyone would ever notice me. I remember the night I came home with that trophy from the math competition, so proud of myself. My parents barely looked up from the TV. My mom's only comment was, "Great, but that's not going to pay for college." And then there was the time Amanda, fresh out of rehab for the second time, was met with open arms. "She's our baby, Rachel," my mom had said, her voice thick with emotion. I looked at myself in the mirror that night, barely recognizing the woman who was staring back at me. I was angry at them, angry at Amanda, angry at myself. But more than anything, I was tired. I was exhausted from fighting for their approval, fighting for a place in a family that never seemed to care about me the way they cared about her. But then something shifted. I wasn't fighting for them anymore. I wasn't fighting for approval. I was fighting for me. I was done being the quiet daughter. I was done being the one they barely acknowledged. And when I finally called them, when I finally sent that text, it wasn't from a place of desperation. It wasn't a cry for help or a plea for validation. It was a message of power. "I have something important to tell you." Then I sat back and waited. The silence that followed was a message in itself. I could feel the weight of that one message. "I have something important to tell you." I sat in my apartment, staring at the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no going back. I'd already made up my mind. I was no longer the quiet, ignored daughter. I was going to show them what real power looked like. But this needed to be done with precision. It needed to be planned, executed with patience and clarity. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me angry. No, this was going to be silent, calculated. I would make them regret everything they'd ever said to me. The first part of the plan was simple. I had to make sure they didn't know the full extent of my winnings. I didn't want them to hear it from the media. No, they were going to hear it from me. I knew how my parents were. They were traditional, emotional, but weak when it came to power. I could feel it in the way they treated me. My father, the corporate man, always belittled me for being too quiet, too reserved. My mom, the homemaker, always praised Amanda for every little thing she did, no matter how trivial. That imbalance was the crux of my plan. Step 1, silence. I kept my winnings completely under wraps. I didn't even tell my closest friends. They didn't need to know yet. I wanted them to be caught off guard. For my parents, the element of surprise would be the most devastating blow. So I stayed out of the public eye, avoiding social media, dodging questions from anyone who cared about me. I was a ghost, a shadow watching. Step 2, distraction. I knew Amanda would be the biggest threat in my plan. She would never leave me alone now that I had what she wanted. She would be the first to dig in her claws, trying to get a piece of the pie. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I started by texting her casually. "Hey, I've been thinking. I'm not sure if I'll be able to help you with that fundraiser you've been planning. Things are just too complicated right now." Her response came almost immediately. "What are you talking about? You have money. I know you do. It's not like you have to worry about anything now, right? You should be using your money to help the family. You're just too proud to admit it." I smirked, my fingers itching to hit send. Instead, I calmly typed out a response. "Funny, I thought you were all about helping yourself. Maybe we'll talk later." I knew that would set her off. I wasn't playing by anyone's rules anymore. Then came the more strategic part of my plan. I knew I had to hit my parents where it hurt the most. They didn't care about me, but they did care about status. The bigger the news, the bigger the impact. So I made a few phone calls. First, I arranged an interview with a local news outlet. It was a small station, but they had a loyal following. The story would be simple. Local woman wins $581 million. A story of triumph. There were no details about the money, no specifics, just enough to create curiosity. Then I made sure to set the date for the interview to coincide with one of my mom's big charity events. That event, a gala she had been planning for months, was going to be my stage, my moment. I wasn't going to just walk in, all flashy and showy. No, I would be the quiet guest, the one who had finally arrived in a room full of their people. I would stand there, calmly sipping a glass of wine while they were surrounded by their social circle. And at the right moment, when all eyes were on them, I would make my grand entrance. The day of the gala arrived. I had already made sure to tell my parents I wouldn't be attending. I knew they'd expect me to stay hidden. I knew they'd believe I had abandoned them. But what they didn't know was that I had already made arrangements to be there. I wasn't going to attend as their daughter. I was going to attend as someone who had power. As the event started, I sat quietly in a car outside the venue, watching the scene unfold. The rich and the famous, the socialites, all gathering in their glamorous outfits. Amanda's laughter echoed through the windows, and I could see her, showing off her engagement ring like it was the world's most precious jewel. But it wasn't her night. It was mine. I stepped out of the car, wearing a simple black dress, understated but elegant. My hair was pinned back, my face free of makeup, because I didn't need to hide anymore. This was my moment. I knew exactly where to go. I walked toward the entrance, my heels clicking on the pavement. The camera crews and guests barely looked up. But as I entered the ballroom, a hush fell over the room. It was time to make them feel my presence. And just as I thought I'd faded into the background, someone from the press approached me with a microphone. "Are you Rachel?" they asked, recognizing me from the earlier interview. I nodded, smiling coldly. "Can you tell us a bit about your winnings?" they asked, their voice almost shaky. The room went quiet. "I'd rather not," I said with a soft smile. "Not yet." And that was it. The seeds had been planted. I could see the panic on my parents' faces, their eyes flickering toward me. Amanda's mouth hung open, disbelief in her eyes. They had no idea what was coming next. The storm was just beginning. The room was electric with confusion, whispers spreading like wildfire. Guests, trying to maintain composure, exchanged glances. My parents' faces turned ashen. Amanda's perfect smile faltered, her eyes darting from me to the press, her voice caught in her throat. I didn't have to say a word. The shock on their faces said everything. They had no idea what was happening. They had no idea what was coming. But I did. I had been patient, calculated, silent, and now I was ready to watch it all unfold. The press had been expecting a grand statement. They wanted the scoop, the grand revelation that would make headlines. But instead they got nothing. Nothing but a calm, composed woman in the midst of their chaos. I hadn't said anything of real value. I hadn't dropped the bomb yet. I sipped my wine slowly, savoring the taste. Every sip felt like the slow burn of revenge, a reminder of all the years I'd spent being invisible. And then, when the timing was right, I made my move. I turned to my parents, who were trying to piece together what had just happened. My dad, who had spent so many years undermining me, his mouth working but no words coming out. My mom, her face flushed with panic, reached out to me, her voice trembling. "Rach, honey, what is this all about?" Her voice wavered, the warmth that had always been a facade for her manipulation slipping away. "We didn't know you were involved with the media. Why didn't you tell us?" I glanced at her, but I didn't speak right away. I didn't need to. My silence was more powerful than anything I could have said. Finally, I broke it, my voice calm and clear. "Because I didn't want to share this moment with you," I said. "I didn't want to share it with anyone. But I think it's time you knew. I won the lottery. $581 million. The words hung in the air like a bomb, ready to explode. I watched their faces. The horror. The panic. My father's hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. His lips parted, but no words came out. My mother's breath hitched, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time in my life, I saw them scared. Not just scared of what they had done, but scared of me. Amanda was the first to speak, her voice shaky. You're lying." Her words were weak, desperate. This isn't real." But I didn't respond to her. Instead, I turned to my father, who looked like he might collapse. Remember when you told me that I'd never make it? That I'd always be the one left behind? I didn't give him time to answer. Well, it looks like I made it. The words cut through the room like a blade. I could see the color drain from their faces. They had spent so many years treating me like I was invisible, like I was the second choice. They had neglected me for years, throwing Amanda's success in my face, telling me I wasn't enough. But now I was the one holding all the cards. I've made my peace with this, but I don't think you ever will, I said softly. And honestly, I don't care. I turned to leave, leaving them in their state of shock. The silence was deafening. The payoff of all my patience, all my planning had come to fruition. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I didn't need them. I stepped out of the ballroom, the cold night air greeting me like a familiar friend. The city lights twinkled in the distance, but I wasn't interested in any of it. This wasn't about the money anymore. This was about something much bigger. It was about showing them that despite everything they had done, I had risen above it. I had made something of myself. And now they had to face the consequences of their neglect. My chest swelled with a sense of relief. I had finally taken my power back. As I walked away from that night, the weight I had been carrying for years seemed to lift. I thought about all the hurt, all the moments when I felt overlooked, like I didn't matter. But now I knew I wasn't just the invisible daughter. I was someone who could stand tall, who had the strength to change her life and her story. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. The most powerful feeling was not the millions I had in my bank account, but the freedom I had gained from not letting them control me anymore. They thought they could shape my destiny, but they were wrong. My story wasn't theirs to write. It was mine, and I had reclaimed it. As I sat there, reflecting on everything, I smiled through the pain. The lesson was clear. Never let anyone define your worth. What would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Hallway as Emma bent down to retrieve the envelope. She already knew what it was before she opened it. Another wedding. Another reminder. She turned the stiff, glossy card over in her hands. The names of her younger sister and soon-to-be brother-in-law printed in gold letters. No warm note inside. Just the details, the formality. No phone call, no excitement shared. She wasn't family, she was a courtesy. Emma sat on the worn couch in her small apartment, her fingers tracing the edges of the invite. The familiar sting welled up in her chest, heavier this time. How many weddings had she stood outside of, watching from the background as her siblings twirled under fairy lights, toasted champagne, posed for family portraits. Ones she was never truly part of. She was always there, technically. In the group photos, somewhere on the edge, smiling too hard to hide how out of place she felt. Her phone buzzed on the table. A family group message. Jokes about the upcoming wedding, excitement filling the chat. Emma stared at the screen for a long minute before turning it face down, without replying. She had learned long ago that her silence was safer than her honesty. A memory flickered. Years ago, at her brother's wedding, standing by herself while relatives she barely knew were ushered into group pictures. The way her mother had waved her away absent-mindedly, saying, "Let's just get siblings and close family first," as if she was something else, something less. Emma wiped the corner of her eye and laughed bitterly under her breath. It wasn't the invite that hurt the most. It was the consistency. Every time she hoped for something different, she was reminded exactly where she stood. And now, as she held the latest proof between her hands, something inside her didn't just ache, it hardened. She wouldn't cry this time. She wouldn't beg for inclusion with polite texts or guilty calls. No more pretending that a chair at the back of the reception was enough. No more convincing herself that love meant patience, that family ties excused indifference. Emma folded the invitation carefully and slid it back into its envelope. She placed it in a drawer alongside others she had never thrown away, each one a silent testimony to years of trying to matter. As she closed the drawer with a soft click, she felt the beginning of something stir inside her. Not rage, not bitterness, but resolve. She didn't know what shape her future would take, but one thing was clear. She was done asking for space in lives that had long closed their doors to her. One day, it would be her turn to celebrate something beautiful, something sacred. And when that day came, she would choose differently. Not out of spite, but out of peace. A peace she was just beginning to taste, even in her quiet heartbreak. Emma leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the silence around her heavy, yet comforting. For the first time in years, she realized her story wasn't ending here. It was just beginning. The kitchen always smelled like fresh bread when Emma was little. She would sit on the counter swinging her legs, watching her mother knead dough with practiced hands. It was one of the few places she felt truly seen. Before life got complicated, before being the quiet one meant being forgotten, Emma and her brother, Daniel, were close once, or at least that's how it looked to others. Daniel was the golden child, confident, charismatic, always a step ahead. Teachers adored him. Relatives bragged about him. It was easy to bask in his glow when they were young, but as the years stretched on, the difference between them sharpened like a blade. His successes became milestones the family celebrated. Emma's quiet efforts barely rippled the surface. She remembered her high school graduation clearly. Daniel had just landed an internship with a prestigious law firm, and her parents spent the evening talking about his bright future, while Emma sat silently at the corner of the dinner table, her diploma tucked under her chair like an afterthought. It wasn't that she failed. Emma had dreams too, small at first, like owning a little cafe where people felt like family. But dreams needed air to breathe, and hers often suffocated under the heavy blanket of comparison. Every birthday, every holiday, every minor success was dimmed by the constant, unspoken question, why couldn't she be more like Daniel? She learned early to stop explaining herself. Instead, she started building in silence, saving bits of her paycheck from a string of odd jobs, sketching out business plans on napkins during lunch breaks, reading articles late into the night after long shifts, her eyes burning but her heart steady. Opening her first restaurant hadn't been a grand event. There were no big announcements, no proud family dinners to toast her achievement. Just her, standing in the doorway of a tiny rented space, keys in one hand, paint-stained jeans on her legs, heart pounding with a mix of terror and hope. Emma poured everything into that restaurant. The hours were brutal. Sometimes she barely slept, barely ate. Her hands cracked from scrubbing floors herself to save money. There were months she didn't know if she'd make rent. Nights she cried quietly into her pillow so no one would hear how close she was to breaking. But through all of it, she never called home to complain. She never asked for help, never tried to explain what she was chasing. She knew what the answer would be: polite confusion, maybe a few patronizing words about real careers, followed by more stories of Daniel's latest promotion. Each sacrifice added a layer of quiet strength inside her. She was no longer the girl who waited for applause that never came. She was becoming someone else, someone who understood that worth wasn't handed to you. It had to be carved out, piece by painful piece, from a world that rarely cared. And Emma was willing to carve until her hands bled if she had to. The family gatherings became harder to sit through over the years. Emma had mastered the art of smiling without speaking, clapping politely when Daniel announced yet another achievement. His voice always carried over the room, filling the space with a certainty Emma could never fake. Thanksgiving at her parents' house was always the worst. This particular year, the turkey sat dry and untouched on her plate as Daniel regaled everyone with tales from his new promotion. He wore a tailored suit, an expensive watch glinting under the chandelier light, while Emma sat in her plain dress, feeling smaller with each laugh at his jokes. At one point, between dessert and coffee, Daniel turned toward her, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "So, Emma," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard, "still flipping burgers at that little restaurant of yours?" The table erupted into a few awkward chuckles. Even their mother gave a tight, uncomfortable smile, looking anywhere but at Emma. For a split second, Emma couldn't breathe. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, 1,000 retorts rushing to her throat, clawing for escape. She could have listed every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every customer she treated like family. She could have shouted that owning something, building it with her bare hands, meant more than any corner office ever could. But she didn't. She simply set her fork down quietly, folded her napkin, and smiled, a real smile this time. One that didn't seek their approval. One that said, "I hear you and I'm done needing your applause." Inside, though, something shifted. His words didn't just sting, they etched themselves into her bones. Emma realized then that no matter how hard she worked, her family would always measure her against Daniel's yardstick. It wasn't about success. It was about the story they chose to believe. That night, lying awake in her childhood bed, surrounded by old posters and forgotten trophies, Emma made herself a promise. She wouldn't waste energy proving them wrong with words. She would let her actions speak so loudly, so undeniably, that even their silence would crumble under the weight of her truth. The betrayal wasn't the mockery itself. It was the realization that the people she loved most never really saw her. They only saw the outline of what they expected her to be. Quieter, smaller, invisible. Emma knew revenge, fueled by anger, would burn her out. She didn't want to be bitter. She didn't want to become a reflection of their cruelty. She wanted something deeper, something permanent. She wanted peace. And she would find it, not by shouting back across the table, but by rising so far beyond their reach that one day they'd sit at someone else's dinner table, whispering her name with a regret too heavy to bear. That night marked a quiet ending and an even quieter beginning. The months that followed were some of the hardest of Emma's life. While Daniel enjoyed corporate lunches and luxury vacations, Emma was working 16-hour days, pouring herself into the tiny restaurant most of her family barely acknowledged. At first, growth came in tiny, almost invisible increments. A new espresso machine, a handful of regulars who started bringing friends, a glowing online review that brought in a trickle of new customers. Emma learned quickly that dreams weren't built by giant leaps. They were shaped, painfully and slowly, by the small choices made every single day. There were sacrifices, too, brutal ones. She missed birthdays, weddings, even funerals. Relationships wilted under the constant demands of her business. There were nights when Emma sat alone at a corner table after closing, staring at the empty chairs, wondering if all the loneliness was even worth it. Doubt crept in like a bitter cold. Was she chasing a future that didn't exist? Was Daniel right? Maybe all she'd ever have was this, a small, struggling restaurant no one cared about. But every time those thoughts tried to take root, Emma remembered that Thanksgiving. She remembered the smirk on Daniel's face, the way their mother had looked at her with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. She remembered how small she had felt, and how badly she never wanted to feel that way again. So she kept going. Emma read every book on business she could get her hands on. She took night courses in finance and marketing. She studied restaurant management like it was a life or death science. While her classmates were out celebrating promotions, she was designing new menus, negotiating with suppliers, and learning the brutal realities of running a business. Slowly, the restaurant transformed. She renovated the interiors, creating an elegant, welcoming atmosphere that made people linger. She hired a brilliant young chef who understood Emma's vision and elevated the cuisine. Word started to spread beyond her little town. Food bloggers visited. A local magazine featured her on the cover. And then came the real breakthrough, an opportunity to buy the neighboring property. It was a massive risk. Emma would have to mortgage everything she had, take out loans she wasn't even sure she'd qualify for. Failure wasn't just possible, it was likely. But Emma didn't hesitate. She signed the papers with trembling hands, staking her future on her own belief in herself, the same belief her family never had. Standing in front of the empty lot that would soon become her second restaurant, Emma felt something deep inside her shift. She wasn't that insecure girl sitting silently at a dinner table anymore. She was building something real, something permanent. And it was all hers. The sacrifices hadn't broken her. They had forged her. Emma understood now. True growth was quiet. It didn't need applause or permission. It only needed relentless faith. And she was just getting started. The day of reckoning came like any other ordinary day, except fate had woven a very different script behind the scenes. Emma stood at the front of her newly expanded fine dining restaurant, dressed in a sleek black dress, her hair neatly pinned up. The atmosphere buzzed with the soft murmur of conversation, clinking glasses, and the comforting notes of a live piano. Her staff moved like a well-rehearsed orchestra. Every detail was polished to perfection. just the way Emma had envisioned it when she used to sit alone dreaming after those long nights of cleaning dishes. She was adjusting a floral arrangement at the entrance when the glass doors swung open. A familiar voice echoed through the space. Emma's heart skipped. It was Daniel. But he wasn't alone. Behind him strode a tall man in an expensive suit, Daniel's company's biggest client. Emma recognized him from a local business magazine feature. Apparently, Daniel had been desperate to impress this client to land a multi-million-dollar deal that could make or break his position at the firm. Emma's fingers froze around the vase. Daniel hadn't noticed her yet. He was too busy laughing loudly, gesturing around, boasting about knowing the best spots in town. His voice carried easily across the restaurant, drawing a few glances. "This is the hidden gem I told you about," Daniel bragged. "I know the owner personally." Emma didn't move. She simply watched from the side, her expression composed, her presence unnoticed for now, just the way she wanted it. The maitre d', trained to perfection, greeted Daniel with professional warmth. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Le Jardin. Do you have a reservation?" Daniel chuckled, waving dismissively. "No need. The owner's my family. Emma. Emma something, right?" He turned, scanning the room lazily. His eyes landed on her. For a fraction of a second, confusion flickered across his face. Then came the slow, dawning horror. Emma stepped forward slowly, a polite but distant smile on her lips. "Good evening, Daniel." The client turned too, curious, sensing the sudden shift in Daniel's demeanor. "You know the owner personally?" the client asked, impressed. Daniel swallowed hard. Yes. She's, my sister." Emma inclined her head gracefully. "Actually, I'm the sole owner of this restaurant." "And," she said calmly, "the building's on this block." The client raised his eyebrows, clearly even more impressed now. He turned to Emma, eager to shake her hand. Meanwhile, Daniel stood frozen, a faint flush creeping up his neck. The mask of superiority he always wore was slipping, piece by piece. Emma didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply guided the client and Daniel to a private table, treating them no differently than any other guests. Professional, courteous, and absolutely in control. Daniel struggled through the dinner, his words fumbling, his laughter forced. Every time he looked at Emma, he was reminded, silently and painfully, that the small restaurant he once mocked had blossomed into something he could never claim and never touch. Emma had said nothing cruel. She hadn't needed to. Her success spoke louder than anything she ever could. Emma moved through the restaurant with the quiet authority of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. She checked on her guests, smiled gently at the servers, and offered a kind word to the kitchen staff. Every movement, every word, was wrapped in calm dignity. Daniel sat stiffly at the private table, his client deep in conversation with Emma, praising the elegance of the place. Daniel forced a tight smile, but Emma could see the panic behind his eyes. She could feel it, the silent collapse of his ego. And yet, she remained composed, not a single word of accusation passing her lips. That was the most powerful part. There were no screaming matches, no dramatic scenes. Only silence. A silence filled with the heavy weight of truth. As Emma returned to the table with a personalized dessert, something she designed herself, Daniel attempted a strained laugh. "I guess you really turned things around, huh?" Emma simply smiled, her expression unreadable. "I guess so." No bitterness, no smugness, just calm acknowledgement. Inside, Emma felt a strange peace settle over her. She had spent years carrying the burden of feeling less than, of thinking she needed to explain herself or fight for recognition. But standing there, watching Daniel squirm under the weight of his own actions, she realized she didn't owe anyone anything anymore. The client leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. "You know," he said to Daniel, "if you had mentioned your sister's empire earlier, it would have made tonight's negotiations much easier." Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no words. Emma excused herself with grace, leaving them to their meal. She didn't hover. She didn't wait for Daniel to apologize. She didn't need it. Her entire being radiated a message louder than any speech she could have given. "I built this without your support, and I don't need your validation now. Later, when Daniel caught her alone near the wine cellar, his voice was low, almost pleading. Emma, listen, about before? I never meant to. Emma looked at him steadily, her brown eyes warm but distant. It's okay, Daniel, she said softly. You don't have to explain. And she meant it. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for herself. She had no interest in reopening old wounds, no desire to make him squirm more than he already was. She simply chose to rise above it, leaving him trapped in the mess of his own regret. Daniel nodded awkwardly, looking everywhere but at her. He was hoping for an easy fix, a way to erase the years of mockery with a few clumsy words. But some things couldn't be undone by apologies. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way. Emma smiled once more, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly on the polished floors. Silence, dignity, strength. That was her revenge. And it was far more satisfying than any shouting match could have ever been. That night, after the last guests had left and the staff had begun cleaning up, Emma sat alone in the corner of her restaurant, a glass of water in her hand. The soft glow of the chandeliers cast golden reflections across the polished tables. She leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the stillness wash over her. It was over. Not just the evening, but something much deeper. A chapter she hadn't even realized she was still carrying inside her. Emma thought back to the little girl she once was, the one who had always trailed behind Daniel, who had been told to be more like him, to think bigger, to know her place. She had spent so many years tangled in invisible chains, desperate for approval from people who never cared enough to see her worth. And yet here she was, not because they finally saw her, but because she stopped waiting for them to. A bittersweet smile tugged at Emma's lips. She had built her success out of quiet mornings and sleepless nights, out of the sacrifices nobody ever saw, the tears shed in the back rooms of failing businesses, the dreams whispered into the darkness when everyone else had given up on her. She remembered the loneliness, the moments of doubt, the days when even she questioned whether her dreams were foolish. But somehow, someway, she had kept going. Tonight wasn't just about showing Daniel or her family how wrong they were. It wasn't even about proving anything anymore. It was about realizing that the approval she had craved all her life was meaningless compared to the pride she now felt in herself. Emma no longer needed them to see her. She saw herself. The woman who had once stood silent under her brother's mocking laughter was gone. In her place stood someone unshakable, someone who knew her own worth. Not because it had been handed to her, but because she had carved it out of stone with her own hands. There was no anger left, no lingering bitterness, only a quiet, powerful sense of peace. She thought about Daniel's awkward apology, his downcast eyes, his struggle to bridge a gap he had created with years of condescension. For a brief moment, Emma felt a flicker of pity for him. Not anger, just sadness for how much he had lost by never truly seeing her. She lifted her glass in a quiet toast to herself, to the journey, to the strength born out of silence, to the woman who had once been invisible and who now owned the very block she was once laughed at for dreaming about. In that moment, Emma realized that true success wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them regret it. It was about never needing them to matter at all. She placed the empty glass on the table, stood up, and walked across her restaurant, her empire, with a grace that came from surviving what should have broken her. The transformation was complete. Emma was free. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Emma couldn't help but reflect on the shift that had taken place. She had expected some form of closure after the encounter with Daniel. But the truth was, what she felt wasn't satisfaction. It was a profound sense of peace. There was no bitterness, no lingering desire for revenge. What had once felt like an insurmountable obstacle in her life had, with time, melted away into a distant memory. Daniel reached out a few days later. His message was terse and apologetic, but it was too little, too late. Emma didn't need to hear his words. The apology felt hollow, like a bandage over a wound that had already healed. Her phone buzzed with another text, then another, and yet Emma didn't feel the urge to respond. His regret wasn't hers to accept. The truth was, it didn't matter anymore. She had long since stopped looking for validation from those who never saw her. His attempts to reconnect felt like a faint echo of a life she no longer wanted to revisit. Emma was finally free. The restaurant had become more than a business. It was the symbol of her freedom, of the woman she had become in the face of neglect and disrespect. With every dish served, with every guest welcomed, she reclaimed a piece of her dignity. It was a new beginning, not just for her career, but for her entire life. Looking out the window of her office, Emma watched as the sun dipped below the horizon. The city buzzed below, its pulse strong and unrelenting, just like the strength that now beat in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged to herself. No longer defined by her family's expectations, no longer bound by the labels they had tried to place on her. She was Emma, the woman who had dreamed, the woman who had fought, the woman who had won. And it felt good. As the last rays of sunlight touched the skyline, Emma smiled softly to herself. She had come full circle. The woman who once stood at the mercy of her family's harsh judgment had now become a force in her own right. Her business, her life, her future, they were all hers to shape. And no one, least of all her brother, could take that from her. "Sometimes the loudest revenge is silence," she whispered to herself, the words floating in the air like a secret only she knew. Silence had been her strength, her weapon, and her salvation. There was no need for anything more. No need for apologies, no need for explanations. The life she had created spoke louder than any words could. Emma had forged her path, and she would walk it with her head held high, knowing that true peace comes not from what others give you, but from what you take for yourself. And so the final chapter closed, not with a bang, but with a quiet, resolute peace.